This year, the Mann Institute is proud to present our Whole Child Award to 4 outstanding leaders working to improve the lives of children and families. The award was created in 2015 to add momentum to the whole child movement by shining a light on the important work of those individuals who put a whole child approach to their practice every single day. Neuroscience, genetics, and biology offer increasingly support for the interwoven concept of the whole child, which reaches back a millennium that mind, body, and spirit are connected and influence one another. The Mann Institute seeks to honor those professionals whose practice values and reflects this understanding. The prize recognizes outstanding work done in multiple sectors because we know that to have truly healthy children, we need leaders in education, medicine, policy, and community. When we put out our call for nominations, we received an enormous, it was overwhelming number of qualified candidates. Our selection committee worked hard and reviewed the credentials of all of the highly impressive group of nominees. Our winners are amazing. So I'm going to start with our first winner, and he is winning the Whole Child Award in Medicine, and his name is Dr. Tom Boyce. And Tom Boyce is the Lisa and John Pritzker Distinguished Professor of Developmental and Behavioral Health in the Departments of Psychiatry and Pediatrics at UC San Francisco. He is the chief of the UC San Francisco Division of Developmental Behavioral Pediatrics. Dr. Boyce is a remarkable example of the transdisciplinary clinical scientist who has made a substantial impact through his research, academic and clinical leadership, and efforts to transform the educational path of pediatricians. In terms of research, Dr. Boyce's work has revealed the individual differences in risk and resilience among children. We heard a little bit about it this morning when we were talking about the orchid and the dandelion. To help explain individual differences, Dr. Boyce developed the framework of biological sensitivity to context. This fundamental understanding that children differ in their response to stress and environments has been transformative and has broad implications for how we understand, prevent, and treat health problems among children. Dr. Boyce is also an academic that has published nearly 200 peer-reviewed articles and book chapters on an early adversity in children's health and development. It's a lot to read here. He's done so much. While busy with research and academic pursuits, Dr. Boyce is also a cherished and very cherished, I know, pediatrician at UC San Francisco, where he puts his cutting-edge research directly into practice in caring for children and families. As Chief of Developmental Medicine, he is an exceptional leader to the team of healthcare professionals across medicine, nursing, psychology, and psychiatry. Dr. Boyce is also a leader in pediatric education. He is currently working on a training model that prepares pediatricians to provide holistic medicine and psychosocial services for youth raised in stressful environments. Dr. Boyce has enriched the lives of countless individuals through his research, clinical practice, and teaching. Please join me in congratulating Dr. Boyce on his prize.
Thank you so much.
So much.
Wonderful honor.
And thank you so much for all of your work.
Thank you. Lovely. Thank you.
Okay, I need to find my next one. Okay. Our next Whole Child Award recipients were nominated together, and they are a couple, a true couple in every way. They're a dynamic duo, and they are being recognized for their work in community education. Pat Kuhl and Andy Meltzoff are two individuals who have each made incredibly significant contributions to the field. And together, through their decades-long partnership, it is easy to say that they have truly changed the way the world thinks about and cares for babies and children. Pat is internationally recognized for her research on early learning and bilingual brain development, for pioneering brain measures on young children, and studies that show how children learn. Pat has received numerous professional honors and has presented her work at 2 White House conferences. Similarly, Andy is a renowned expert on infant and child development. His discoveries about infant imitation have revolutionized our understanding of early cognition, personality, and brain development. His research, body mapping, and the impact of touch build on his earlier work and continue to propel the field forward. Andy has also received numerous professional awards and is an active on the board of Parent Magazine and 0 to 3, among others. Since Pat and Andy are each world-renowned in their own right, what they've accomplished together is transformative. In 2004, Pat and Andy founded the Institute for Learning and Brain Scientists, iLabs, at the University of Washington. Since then, they have created a research institute that produces world-class research on the fundamental questions that underlie human learning. They have also worked tirelessly to ensure that this cutting-edge research makes its way into the hands of parents, educators, and policymakers. Under the direction of Pat and Andy, their team has developed resources that are used broadly across the country. 2 states, for example, have integrated their content into mandatory training for foster parents. Pat and Andy continue to devote themselves to communicating science to the broader public for the purpose of creating better lives for children and families. They have traveled across the globe to share the science and the results of their effort, and they both are amazing at being able to present to people any place in the world. Please join me in congratulating this incredible pair on this award. And I have a special congratulations because where are they? Oh, okay. And I have to say, I have a special congratulations if you weren't here this morning, because they were our very first speakers in Santa Barbara with 30 people, and they presented on the brain, and it was so exciting and wonderful, and I've known them ever since, so I'm so happy. So I have you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Vicki.
You so deserve the best. Okay. I must say we just were so fortunate to have so many outstanding people this year for nominations. And please, next year, keep nominating people because it's wonderful and exciting. So here we are. We are now going to do the award, and his name is Matthew Melman, and he is receiving our Visionary Leadership Award. And since 1995, Matthew has served as the executive director of 0 to 3, a national nonprofit dedicated to ensuring that all babies have a safe, strong start in life. Under Matthew's leadership, 0 to 3 has become a leading voice for toddlers, infants, and their families. 0 to 3's tagline, "Early connections last a lifetime," guides Matthew's work, and he has created a powerful network of resources and support for children and families across the country. Matthew has led 0 to 3 as it's become a national leader in training early childhood professionals. Each year, more than 17,000 professionals receive 0 to 3 training. 0 to 3 is also introducing national competencies for infant and toddler care and education professionals, as well as a cross-sector competency designated to promote collaboration and effective family service delivery across early childhood sectors. Matthew established the 0 to 3 Policy Center, which works across the nation to establish policies that promote good health, strong families, and positive learning experiences for all children. The 0 to 3 Policy Network is comprised of more than 65,000 people who are all raising their voices in support of building a comprehensive web of support for young children and families. Under Matthew's leadership, 0 to 3 has also made significant contributions to babies and toddlers in the child welfare system. Safe Babies court teams have been established in more than 20 communities, providing a community-based, developmentally appropriate response to these vulnerable young children. Safe Babies court teams represent innovative partnerships with judges, child welfare agencies, and community organizations. Research demonstrates that children, I'm not thinking you're laughing at me, but I know you're laughing at the pictures. Research demonstrates that children served by Safe Babies court teams exit the foster care system a year earlier than a national comparison group and are more likely to find permanency with a family member. Matthew's work provides a remarkable example of the impact of collaboration across sectors to create impact and change. Thank you to everyone who nominated. Wait a minute. Please join me in congratulating Matthew on his award. Amazing. Didn't realize. It's amazing. Gosh. It's amazing. Okay, let me see if I have anything more to say. Thank you to everyone who nominated such an incredible group of candidates for this year's Whole Child Awards. We cannot wait to see where their talent and their leadership will take us this year. Right now, I'm going to introduce Priska Neely, and she's going to carry on. Priska?
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Priska Neely, and I am a reporter at KPCC, which is the local public radio station. Thank you. I always say to people, yes, this is what I look like. And you may know my voice, but this is my face. Newsflash. So I cover early childhood for KPCC, and I have the honor of focusing on 0 to 5 issues. I like to describe it as the children 0 to 5 and the people and the policies that shape their lives. And that's a really unique beat to cover. I've been in public radio for a while and stepped into this role about a year ago, and it's been very interesting to see the excitement and to see the public interest, to see the legislation in this space. And just a little bit about my early childhood. My mom was a kindergarten teacher, and she had 4 children and started a home daycare to stay at home with us. So when I reflect on that, there's so many times where I'm like, oh, Mom, I'm thinking about this thing that you did with me, and I really appreciate her so much more doing this work. And I'm really honored to be here today and to have our esteemed panel, and we're just going to talk a little bit. Feel free to ask each other questions, to jump in at any time. But the question I wanted to start with, this is the Whole Child Awards, and that perspective, thinking about the whole child, I think there's so many buzzwords in this space that I had to learn coming in, and that whole child approach is something that can be easy to say, but a little bit harder to do in practice in a really meaningful way. And I wonder, since you're being awarded today, how you came to view the whole child. Was there a moment, was there something that happened in your research that said, all of this is connected? And Tom, I want to start with you.
So, Priska, it's developed kind of iteratively along the way in my adult life, but it probably began when I was a second-year medical student and rotating through pediatrics and a newborn nursery and examining a newborn baby for the first time and realizing kind of breathlessly that I was the first human being to examine this little person.
Wow.
So new that I had to count fingers and count toes and be sure that everything was there. And it struck me right from the beginning that this was, this is a person, this is a whole child. And, as I have gone on to have, my wife and I have 2 children of our own who are now in their late 30s. We have 4 grandsons, and with each of those births, there's much more of a feeling that these are human beings, whole creatures that make their way through life, and we are obligated to respond to that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Lovely. Pat, Andy, I don't know if you have individual answers, but I'm also interested in how you came to do it together, to have this whole child approach together. It's just fascinating to me.
Well, it is, but we do have, like any married couple, we have differences of opinion,
not
but we
going there,
have no, we won't. I just wanted to start by saying that I think Mann was brilliant in naming this the Whole Child Award. I think that name represents a sea change that all of us, and I think all of us, have seen over the past, I don't know, it's actually been 2 decades, I think. And for me, personally, it started with the discoveries related to the brain. Because brain scientists were one of the worst when it came to separating, because of the parts of the brain, the right hemisphere, the left hemisphere. We got into the habit, particularly as I came through school, that's a long time ago, of thinking of the right hemisphere as the soft side and the side that has feelings and the side that is interested in music and emotion. But the left side was your logic and your math and your language and all these computational skills. And we had this vision not only about people and their skills and interests, but also about the brain. But brain science now, again, a sea change has occurred, and even in babies, the ability to measure activity in the baby brain as the baby's doing something, working on a problem or seeing a face or hearing a word, what we're noticing is that when you look at the activity in the brain and you look at the areas and the connections between them, it is always the whole brain. So in one of my own studies, the discovery that the social brain dictates when you're going to learn language. Babies don't learn from a television set, but learn live from a live speaker in a foreign language experiment at 9 months. You begin to realize the social brain sort of running the show here. It's the gateway to cognitive learning. So that just represents a whole new view about how the brain and the body, now it's the gut and the brain, are connected. And so I don't know how, and hope we don't ever go back to the compartmentalization. It's really important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I just want to say that, when baby is born, you hold this red, wrinkly little newborn baby in your arm and watch when the child grows up to 3 and they're walking and talking, and sometimes they can lie to you if they have crumbs on their face, and you've said, don't eat the cookie, and you said, did you eat the cookie? They might look at you and say, no. They feel a sense of empathy and compassion for others, which is really stunning to observe. All of you have probably seen it. If a mother is hurt, a child can walk over to the mother, put their hand on their shoulder, even offer the mother a treasured teddy bear. Vicki, you talked earlier about transitional objects. So here we have a 3-year-old who wants to share something with another human being who feels pain. They somehow can feel empathy for others. So when you observe that as a scientist, And scientists around the country nowadays are doing studies on very interesting topics, like the development of empathy or sharing feelings with others, sharing gaze with others. You can't help but think of and realize that it's a whole child. Scientists used to, as Pat said, divide it into domains of maybe brain, language, mental, social, emotional, and motor development. And departments in universities are often named and study these different things. So language is studied in the Department of Speech and Hearing Sciences or Linguistics. Cognition is studied in psychology. Brain maybe in the medical school. It tends to divide us or make us into silos, but the child is a whole child. And the secret for how that child gets from the red, wrinkly little newborn to the empathetic, compassionate 3-year-old is by bringing those all together and interweaving these separate domains. It is genuinely a whole child.
Yeah, that just reminded me of the other, oh, sure. The other day I was on the phone with my sister, and I have 2 nephews. One of them is 4, and I could hear him in the background kind of having some type of breakdown. I was on speaker, and I was like, honey, what is going on? And he quickly got himself together, and he just says, oh, that was just a little bit of sadness. So that this self-awareness for a 4-year-old is just hilarious, and he completely snapped out of it at that point and started kind of reenacting his whole meltdown. So
he didn't say, how do you feel about that?
Not yet, maybe next year. Great, yeah, so for you, getting into that kind of whole child mindset.
Well, I think it is something that's really at the essence of what 0 to 3 as an organization is. It was founded 40 years ago by leaders in different disciplines. Sally Provence from Yale, who was mentioned today, or Selma Freiberg, who wrote The Magic Years, T. Barry Brazelton. They came together because they had different pieces of knowledge, and they were sort of like the blind men and women with the elephant, and they were trying to figure out, what is this whole child about? And it really was that cross-disciplinary, and I think ultimately transdisciplinary urge that helped them to create that complete picture of what, in fact, is a baby, and how should we, as adults, be able to understand them and be able to grow with them over time. And I think it's been an evolution. And clearly, being in the disciplinary silos has been a challenge. And we see that not just in academia, we see this in the policy realm. We see all these different silos and compartments that we as adults create because we want to understand something in more depth. But the reality is taking that step up and understanding how it all connects. And most critically, I think, in terms of the themes of the brilliant presentations that Vicki arranged this morning, that it really is about social emotional development. It's how we feel. Mm-hmm. If we cannot feel trusted, if we cannot feel safe, if we're not feeling loved, we can't do anything else. And I think that is the ultimate essence of how we really foster a whole child movement in this country.
I feel in my work, and coming into this, looking at it from the outside, I feel like there's a lot of times the stories I'm doing is just kind of covering silos, covering the fact that different departments, different whatever, are not communicating with each other, and kind of wondering what could happen if there was more communication. And there's always that question that comes up for journalists is, why should people care about this for the stories that I do? Why does the audience care? And I feel like in a lot of my stories, I'm just like, well, children turn into adults, just kind of constantly reminding people of that, because, we were once all babies and young people, and those who are now will one day be, sitting on this stage talking about something. Tom, I wonder, since a lot of your work is really kind of getting pediatricians to get into this mindset, is that something that is intuitive for them, kind of taking that whole child approach, or not, or do you have to convince?
Well, I believe that we are hopefully on the brink of a complete transformation of pediatrics. I recently counted the number of screening procedures that pediatricians are obligated to do by the American Academy of Pediatrics. It's like 30 different screens. It's screening for this, screening for lead, screening for anemia. Pediatricians are at the present moment fragmented in a way that disallows their doing what I believe that they do best, which is to help parents become better parents. And that process of allowing them to do that is just absolutely key, I think, to a new pediatrics that will take into account the kinds of trauma and adversity that we've heard about this morning, and allow pediatricians to really listen and hear and respond to those kinds of issues in the lives of young families in the same way that people like Barry Brazelton did for all of his career and all of his practice years.
Can I add to that? Because I think part of it is not just the training of pediatricians, it's also the environment that they work in. And if you had that big word screen, frustrated would be really up there. They have 7 minutes in which they're supposed to spend time, and that's what they're getting paid for, and that's what the system really provides. And so the question is, how do you meet the needs of parents these days through the pediatric setting, where virtually every baby and toddler in the United States will show up? And so we've been advancing something called Healthy Steps, which is about embedding within the pediatric practice a team approach. And there's someone in that team who is the developmental specialist who actually turns to mom and dad and says, "How are you feeling?" And it is incredible, the power of being asked that question, and then having someone who will listen and someone who will help provide guidance and support. This is what pediatrics, this is really what pediatrics always wanted to be, can be and should be, but it's not going to be unless our insurance system and our payment mechanisms allow things that to happen. And we could use that base if we really want to create a very strong base of parental connection and social emotional support. We do that as professionals through that setting, and I think that it will in fact be transformational.
Right. I mean, I think this, I really support that. I think that you're bringing up this broader issue of how do we get the nuggets of the science out to the people who matter, so the parents, the pediatricians, the teachers. The scientific discoveries have just been flooding in over the past 10 years, especially with regard to the brain and this relationship between brain, body, and sort of social, emotional, and cognitive skills. And one of the problems is what's the creative way of putting that in front of parents, pediatricians, teachers? How do we do that? Many groups are trying to convey those materials in a transformative way. And some of the new ones are to create small videos, 2-minute to 4-minute videos that parents can see on cell phones. So the Aspen Institute, I think funded by Robert Wood Johnson, just created a national commission to prepare materials for teachers in all of our schools, from elementary through high school, to convince teachers that the social emotional self has something to do with academic learning. And they decided on, through focus groups, these 2 to 4 minute videos. So I've just made some that are undergoing focus group testing right now. And the whole point is to get materials in a very easily digestible way into the hands of parents and teachers. And I think putting effort there is a really, really important thing to do.
Right, because you have all this wonderful information, but you need to make sure that everyone else knows what you're learning.
Right.
Well, some people in the room may be familiar with your work already, but I just wanted to kind of give a little tidbit about some of the really fascinating things that you know. So, Tom, could you explain the concept of the Orchid Child?
Sure. So Michael Meany this morning was talking about the diversity of populations, the realization that we are all so very different. The despicable subgroup who can eat all they want and not gain weight was a great example of that. But we know even within families that individual children are extremely different. I have 4 grandsons, as I said earlier. That gives you a vivid portrayal of the differences between 4 little boys of slightly different age but who are altogether different individuals, each one of them. We began, early in my work, I was interested in the role of stress and adversity in transforming biological processes in the lives of children that would predispose them to disorders of either biomedical disorders or psychiatric behavioral kinds of disorders. And we were aware that there was a connection between experiences of adversity sustained by a child and these kinds of outcomes in both the physical and the mental socio-emotional domains. But what we became even more struck with as we pursued this is now 30 years ago, was that there was just an extreme amount of variability in the kinds of outcomes that we saw among individual children who had either experienced virtually no adversity and stress, who had very supportive, encouraging life circumstances, and other children who were in disadvantaged homes, who were experiencing lots of adversity. In both of those kinds of settings, there was this extreme variability in children's outcomes. And we, for a number of years, regarded that variability as kind of noise in our research model. And we tried valiantly to get that noise out of those associations that we were finding between stress and illness. And at some point, we began to think maybe that noise is not noise. Maybe that is actually the music. And maybe that's what we need to be listening to and understanding. So we began bringing children into very standardized, predictable, scripted situations where they were asked to go through a set of challenging, mildly stressful tasks at the hands of an examiner that they had not known before. And while they were doing that, we were monitoring aspects of their stress response system, some of the systems that we've heard about this morning, the adrenocortical system that produces cortisol, and the autonomic system which produces the fight or flight response. And what we found was that there was this extraordinary variation in children's reactivity to these very standardized kinds of challenges. Even more remarkable, when we looked at the children who had very high reactivity in the laboratory situation, we found that in real life, those kids either had the best outcomes or the worst outcomes, depending upon the kind of social environment in which they were being reared. Now this really flew in the face of the way that we conventionally think about individual differences in response to adversity. We typically, as a kind of cultural, I think, myth, think of kids as either being vulnerable or resilient. And it's a wrong way of thinking about it, because the vulnerable kids are not so much vulnerable as they are sensitive and susceptible. And they are susceptible to both positive environments and to negative environments. So they do brilliantly in good, encouraging, supportive environments with plenty of routine and predictability. They do terribly in environments of adversity and disadvantage. And so we began to talk about those kids as orchid children, and the kids who are basically unperturbed by this variation in social environment as dandelion kids. It really was spawned by an encounter I had with an old Swedish guy after I gave a lecture at Stanford one year, who came down and said, pointed his cane at me and said, "You're talking about Maskrosbarn." And I said, Maskros what? And he said, "The Swedes have a name for the kids that you're talking about. It's Maskrosbarn, and it means dandelion child. And what the Swedes mean by that are kids who can grow up regardless of circumstance." So we adopted this phrase, dandelion child, and coined this new Swedish neologism, orkidebarn, which is orchid child.
Wow.
That's very interesting.
Differentiate those
Wow.
kids.
That's really interesting, mentioning those labels, kind of vulnerable or resilient, because I mean that's a thing that I can understand wanting to do. It seems easy, but of course we are all more complicated than that. Andy, I understand that last year you spoke about children imitating their parents' or caregivers' behavior, and that is always something that I think about when it comes to our digital lives and devices. But anyway, I think that's another conversation. But right now you're doing research about body mapping and the impact of touch. What are you learning, and what are you expecting to learn?
Yeah, that's a very exciting area, and it's connected to imitation. So children learn first from imitating others before they have language, before you can give verbal instructions. They watch what you do. For instance, you pick up an adult picks up a cell phone and holds it to the ear, or they type keys on a computer. Our children are watching us, and they imitate what we do. We have a film of a little 2.5-year-old in the lab where we put objects on the floor. They picked up a telephone and walked around the lab and said, "I can't hear you, can't hear you. You're raking up, you're raking up." And I don't think this 2.5-year-old even knew what she was saying.
Yeah.
But as far as she was concerned, that's what you do with these objects.
Right.
Well, we became interested from a neurobiological point of view of what's happening in the brain when this very powerful mechanism of watching other people and incorporating it into your own body, mapping it onto your own body, how is that done? What contributes to that? And that led us to a series of really exciting new studies about the sense of touch. Sense of touch is important for adults and for children. We all have a touch hunger. We love being touched by other people. And we were among the first in the world to look at how touch is represented in the baby's brain. There's a lot of behavioral studies around about touch, and we know how valuable it is for mothers to touch and hold premature infants and things like that. But there hadn't been very much neuroscience. And we did a study that had two aspects that I'll briefly mention that gets us from touch to empathy. So I just want to make this bridge quite quickly. First thing we did is touch the baby as they were in an MEG machine. An MEG or MEG is a machine that essentially can do brain imaging completely safely and non-invasively with young children. And they can move in the MEG machine. It's a little helmet that the child sits under, and it measures brain signals inside the child's brain. That babies are not very good at sitting in an fMRI machine. You know, if you've ever had an MRI, you have to lay flat, lay still. That's not the baby's strong suit.
No.
So we can't do brain imaging very easily with awake little babies, but you can use the MEG device for that. So we touched the infant's hand, and we discovered a particular part in the baby's brain, which is in the central region of the baby's brain that sort of goes from ear to ear, that's called somatosensory cortex. That's the touch area of the brain, you might say. And there's a particular region of the somatosensory cortex that lights up or activates when, for instance, the baby's hands touch, and a different region that lights up when the baby's foot is touched. And we were very, very excited to be able to look inside the baby's brain and find out how they process touch. But the magic study was study 2, where instead of having the baby's own body touched, they watched as somebody else's body was touched. And what we found out is they used the same region of the brain that processes their own sense of touch to process when they see somebody else being touched. And that, I think, is the basis, the neurobiological, very elementary component of empathy. When they see you touch, they're actually using the part of the brain that processes their own touch.
Wow.
So the self-other connection is deeply, deeply built into the brain. We are social creatures at birth. And that helps explain and account for some of the power of social learning and the fact that we're role models, not just for our teenagers, not just for our elementary school students, but we need to convey to parents and policymakers that we are role models for our 3-year-olds, 2-year-olds, and even our 6-month-olds who are watching and listening to us and mapping between their body and our body and learning from us even before we're giving them didactic instructions through language.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is amazing.
Now, I'll just jump in because what's so amazing about Andy's study is the results itself, but also the fact that we can see it. I mean, that we can now safely put young infants, 2-monthers, newborns, into this MEG machine, which is just noiseless, non-invasive machine, and see what's happening inside as you present them with various problems and interesting things to look at and hear. So it's absolutely incredible. When you think about how we were learning about the brain when I was in school. I mean, it was all, everything about us was taught in home ec, and it was only taught to women, about children, I mean. And now it's rocket science. Now it's, neuroscience, and the whole world seems to be piling on to study these phenomena. That's why it's become so interdisciplinary. And you can see things you can't even imagine knowing when you can look inside the brain and see this beginnings of empathy. In other studies that we've done with the MEG machine, when you talk to a young baby, a 6-month or a 7-monther, it isn't just the auditory areas of sensory areas that light up, it's the areas that are eventually going to be able to talk back. So you can show to a parent that when you talk, the reason it's important to talk to your child, engage your child, is that the brain centers that will eventually engage back, get back into the conversation and start this two-way communication, is stimulated when you talk to them, even before they can talk. You could never see that if you didn't have brain imaging to actually see what's happening in the child's brain. So it truly is a miraculous step forward for all of us.
And I was just going to ask you about, your research with language and the images, because I think, we have a lot of information about the importance of talking
Right,
to babies,
yes.
and I think there's been more and more awareness about the importance of that they are taking note, that they can process things. But the power of language in the early years, has having those images, has having that
Yes.
actual data really,
Right.
really changed things in
Yes,
your work?
we can watch the brain grow, these white matter tracks that connect various areas. You can actually see them strengthen in the imaging measures as a function of how much engagement, and I say engagement for a reason. Many of the studies are highlighting the 30 million word gap, the idea that children who are growing up in poverty or growing up in families whose parents don't think it's important to talk to the child early in development. But some of that message has gotten communicated in a way that people think it's just the number of words. It's almost like wearing a Fitbit for words. Parents just have to get 100 more words in. I had a friend who wore a Fitbit, and if he didn't have 10,000 steps at the end of the day, he'd run up and down stairs at night.
Yeah.
So what we want to guard against is the idea that it really is just words. Then a television set would work.
Right.
It's just it isn't just words, it's engaging the baby brain. You can see that in the images, that face-to-face communication, where you're following the gaze of the baby and the baby's gazing at you, and you're engaging one another in an emotional conversation. That's when you see these areas that are going to get the baby talking back stimulated. So this is the kind of thing, it's the quality of that interaction, it's the engagement, as opposed to a word count. Like a Fitbit for words is not what we need.
Okay, anyone thinking of developing that out there, shut it down now. That is not the app that we need. Matthew, so much of the work of 0 to 3 is, kind of getting all of these things that we've talked about out to parents, getting that information to them, which I think is so important. One thing that just kind of really strikes me in your work is this Safe Babies Court, because I think that, in that label of vulnerable, and, there's so much more. I'm even hearing just people that I meet just in daily life who know about ACEs, who know about adverse childhood experiences, and, are kind of thinking that, it's necessarily going to lead to a negative outcome. So that's why I think that the court and kind of that intervention is so interesting. So can you just talk a little bit more about that and how it works?
Sure. I would start by saying I think that the babies rely on the relationships with their parents to ensure that their world is safe and mediated. And we are doing a lot in helping parents to understand what does the science say and what they can do. But the reality is that parents are not alone. When you have a baby in the United States, it's still like being born into the Wild West. There's not a lot of support that's out there. And for parents who particularly have real challenges, who've had in their own lifetime multiple adverse early childhood experiences and are now parents, and they have a young and vulnerable baby, they're coming into this world with a whole bunch of strikes already against them. And you have parents who, no matter how much, and every parent wants to do the best by their child, they do, But some parents bring with them really tremendous challenges because of their own experiences. And unfortunately, what ends up happening is those babies get into situations where they are abused or neglected, more neglect than abuse. And in fact, every 7 minutes in the United States, a baby is taken away from his parent because of abuse or neglect. And they're thrown into a system, our child welfare system, which is really a developmental disaster. The system does everything the opposite of what the science tells us those babies need: secure attachments, getting screened, being stimulated, being loved. They're put into foster homes. They're taken away, and it's like, where am I? I was used to this, and now I'm here. And they're bounced from home to home to home. They don't get screened. They don't get the kinds of services that they need because the system is focused on one thing: physical safety. We want to make sure there's not a dead baby in the newspaper that we're going to get beat up about. And so the system is not about welfare. And I mean, it is about, in that sense, welfare. But we want to transform it to one that's about child well-being. That how do we turn that around? And so as we looked at that system, which is a really intractable one, we found that the key to leveraging the change were judges. You know, judges, I'm a lawyer by training. I'm not an MD, PhD, OTR, RN, DSW. I didn't know what a dyad was when I came to 03 many years ago. I'm a lawyer. When I learned in law school that babies are chattels, they're actually like, you know, possessions. And our system is designed when a baby is taken away. It's an adversarial system with the judge, and all these people are fighting, you know, over this, but no one's really looking at the baby. And so we started working with judges and helping judges understand what was happening developmentally for the baby, and using the power of the judge to bring everyone together, all the different lawyers, the child welfare agency, all the social service agencies, to bring them together and say, how can we, in this system that is adversarial, how can we focus on the developmental needs of these babies so that they, in fact, get what they need and they can stay on the kind of developmental track that you want to see happen? And we've been able to do this now for many years. It's really, really hard. We have multiple sites across the country. But what we're finding is that babies who are exposed to this, and I'll give you one quick example of just concretely of the change. You know, in the old days, what they would do is, you know, you're going to take the baby away. Knock, knock on the door. The police are there. The social workers there. They're taking your kid away, right? Think about it from the baby or toddler's perspective. This is like traumatic, right? What's going on? Where am I being put? We said to the child welfare agency, how about you have a different idea? How about you actually call mom or dad in and say, you know, we know you're having problems, and we'd like to help. And we probably are going to have to take your child away, but come to a meeting. Bring someone who's close to you, who you trust, to that meeting. Let's talk about a plan. And they didn't want to do it at first because they thought, oh my God, they run away. Well, no one ever ran away. And the parents came, and they came with someone that they trusted, and they saw around the table a group of professionals that said, we know you have challenges, and we want to help. We want to listen. We want you to get your baby back. And we actually had one mother who had her child taken away before turn to someone and say, does the state know that you're doing this? I mean, it was like really, you know, that kind of like big change. And so what ends up happening is that because of all the changes that happen in kids getting in one placement, getting screened, we have babies that are coming out of the foster care system, and they're the largest group that enter the foster care system were babies. They end up getting out 1 year earlier. They're getting screened for all of what they need. There's no recurrence of abuse and neglect. I mean, this is truly transformative of that kind of system. But it's the change. There's so much we have to do to keep moving that forward. But to me, this is the tip of the spear in terms of moving that within a really, really intractable system. And if we do it, these are the kids that the science tells us are the most damaged kids. These are the kids that are going to grow up to be in the criminal justice system, to be in special ed. If we can get them early and make those changes, we're not going to be worrying about kids aging out of the foster care system. We will have kept them out of it in the first instance, and I think that's the goal.
Right. Yeah.
Thank you.
Very good.
You are all such wells of knowledge. We are somehow entering our final few minutes here. But I just wanted for each of you to
I think Pat is signaling us.
Oh, we're out of time now? Oh, are you signaling me from the my eyes in the back of my head aren't working right now. Yeah, that's what I was doing. That's what I was doing. Okay. I wanted just each of you to kind of, what would you like this room to know about this mindset that we've been talking about, the whole child movement, to kind of push that forward? A final thought from each of you. What do you want people to take away? John?
I would say, Priska, that we have been studying differences in children's responsiveness, their tenderness, if you will, to the experiences that the world brings them. And those are individual differences within the childhood population. But I think the larger perspective from higher up is that children themselves are the orchid creatures of the world's human populations. Children are those that are the most tender, the most susceptible, the most open, if you will, to the experiences that the world provides. And I think we need to, as a society, remember that, respond to it, remember that if we make the world safe for children, we make the world safe and good for all of us.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's really good. I would say, just to underscore the idea that it all starts right from the beginning, that on day one, even before birth, everything that we're talking about, all of the talks that we heard this morning, so potent in their messages for us, all of that starts right in the beginning. One of the things that the behavioral and brain science has shown us is that these children come into the world so ready. We've been hearing experience dependent. It's experience expectant, meaning the brain is sitting there waiting so much ready for input to map its architecture. And so this idea that the brain is ready and it's we who are providing that input, that begins right at the beginning in the most sophisticated ways you can imagine. And so maybe the people in this room understand that, but to convey that message thoroughly and to everyone you know, I think that's the most important thing to underscore, and the reason why we come here every year to reinforce our own beliefs and learn more about the fact that it begins right from the beginning.
It's kind of a weird thing to have to keep reinforcing,
It is,
isn't it?
But it is. It is so important to everything that we do.
Yeah.
That we understand the capacity
Right.
and the expectancy of that brain, just sitting there waiting to be wired by us, by all of us, and what a responsibility that is.
Yeah, so one of the things that's helped cause a revolution over the last decade or two has been this new growth of brain science tools that allow us to do brain imaging in young children. The reason that's sort of relevant to relationships, social, emotional, and where we're trying to go in this group is that brain science has sometimes been miscommunicated to the public, that when parents hear something is in the child's brain or you can show a brain image, it's sometimes mistakenly thought that that means it's genetic, biological, built in. And so brain science is very exciting, but some people are hearing that as meaning this is part of the child's non-malleable, fixed machinery that's part of the biology that can't change. And brain scientists think the opposite. Brain scientists have a term that you've all heard called neuroplasticity.
Right.
It means that the brain is plastic, the brain can change. The brain does change in development. The brain changes with input. It changes with social input. It changes with safety, care, good social, emotional relationships. That's brain food that changes the wiring of the brain and helps sculpt brain development. So when brain scientists are interested and excited by the new brain science findings, it's not because this shows what's fixed about a baby, but rather it's showing us how much the environment reaches in and changes the brain of the baby. And that's exciting, and always has been exciting to philosophers before they were brain scientists and to religious leaders before they were brain scientists. That is, the puzzle is, how does something as simple as words in the air or facial expressions like this, how can that observed or perceived behavior change the physical world, where the physical world is the brain between your ears? Somehow those perceived signals transform and help grow the physical world. Now that's something that Socrates and Plato was interested in, something St. Augustine was interested in, something that people have been interested in for thousands of years. The exciting part about where we are all now is that we can help communicate the information that social relationships out there transform the brain of the children here. And that's a big change.
Matt, just a quick final thought, or now I think we're out of time.
I would end with gratitude. First, I want to thank, and I think for all of us, thank Vicki and Ron for the recognition. It really is deeply humbling to be recognized for something that you love. And I would express gratitude to everybody in this audience. You care. You're here. You're learning. You're trying to push the envelope. And each of us in our individual roles, whether we're clinicians or researchers, as parents, and I would argue as citizens, can make a real difference in the lives of babies and toddlers and young children. And I would really encourage you, not just in your individual interactions with babies and with parents and young children, but in your roles as citizens, to get involved. Because the only way we're going to make our society change is if we have that public voice, if we're willing to say that we need to be doing things differently, and we need to reprioritize in terms of where we're putting our money and our time and our resources. And I would argue that the science is really clear, that if we do that for babies, if we do that for families, with young kids, we are going to see returns in terms of our future in ways that we could not possibly imagine. But we're only going to get there is if all of us collectively go out and make that happen. So thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much.